All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're decoding Volume 23 of the ancient Daji Dulin. You might also know it as the Great Treatise on the Perfection of Wisdom. Now, this text was written centuries ago, but beneath all that ancient terminology is a really fascinating, highly structured psychological map for true liberation. We're going to break this map down together, step by step, and see exactly how the human mind can transition from everyday suffering to ultimate, absolute clarity.
So here's our roadmap for the journey. We've got 4 distinct stages to cover today. First, the 10 perceptions. Second, the 11 knowledges. Third, the 3 samadhis. And finally, number 4, the 3 roots.
Okay, starting off with Section 1, the 10 perceptions, and how shifting your perspective changes everything.
Now, the treatise starts by identifying the literal root of worldly suffering, which is our faulty perception. But right out of the gate, it addresses a super relatable, very human hesitation. I mean, why meditate on impermanence if it's just going to cause grief? To explain this, the text actually shares a story about a king who fell into deep mourning over his queen. But he wasn't just grieving her. The guy was essentially having an existential midlife crisis about the fleeting nature of youth and beauty. He suddenly realized, everything ends. So the question is, if knowing things end just makes us sad, why deliberately focus on it?
Well, the answer comes down to the depth of our understanding. The text puts it like this: like a lamp in the wind, like a tree on a steep cliff, like a leaking vessel, all beings in their dwellings are impermanent. Now, when we only have a shallow grasp of this, yeah, it absolutely causes grief. We mourn what we lose. But a total, complete immersion into the reality of impermanence, that actually shatters the underlying illusion that traps us into forming those painful attachments in the first place.
Take a look at the concept of the impurity of food. The text literally asks practitioners to visualize their delicious food turning into bodily waste. I know, sorry to ruin your appetite, but there's a really brilliant reason for this. This was basically a radical, ancient method for breaking what we would recognize today as dopamine-driven attachment. By consciously linking something highly desirable with something completely repulsive, they were essentially hacking their own reward circuits to cultivate detachment, a real game changer.
And this brings us to the ultimate goal of changing these perceptions, avoiding the second arrow. The text uses this really powerful comparison. It says an ordinary person who gets sick or injured is shot by 2 arrows. There's the physical pain of the illness, and then there's the mental suffering, that agonizing "why me" that instantly follows. But the sage, because their perception is shifted, they are only ever shot by 1 arrow. They experience the physical illness merely as paying a biological debt to the elements, and they're completely free from the mental anguish of fighting reality.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 11 knowledges, upgrading cognition.
So once our base perspective has shifted, we have to upgrade our day-to-day cognition. And rather than getting bogged down in the details of all 11 knowledges, it helps to just visualize them as steps on a ladder. Right at the bottom, we have worldly knowledge, our everyday assumptions, constructs, and illusions. But as we climb, we acquire knowledges of noble truths and inference, which systematically lift us away from those worldly assumptions, all the way up to pure, unadulterated reality.
And sitting at the very top of that ladder is reality knowledge, or Ru Shiji. The text defines this as the ultimate wisdom that comprehends the true nature of all things without obstruction. So the crucial takeaway here is that as you reach this peak, those other 10 lower knowledges don't just sit next to it. They actually lose their individual names and boundaries entirely. They merge into this ultimate reality knowledge, exactly like 10 distinct rivers finally flowing into one massive unified ocean.
All right, Section 3, the 3 samadhis, stabilizing the mind.
Okay, so our perception is shifted and our cognition is upgraded. But a sharp mind is kind of useless if it's completely chaotic, right? It has to be stabilized. The text's definition of samadhi is beautifully pragmatic. It calls it the place where the mind acts correctly. It describes our untrained, everyday mind as a wandering, crooked snake. But entering samadhi straightens it out perfectly, just like forcing that slithering snake to glide straight through a hollow bamboo tube. The structure of the concentration literally forces the mind into perfect alignment.
But then the treatise throws us a curveball. It asks us to consider a paradox. If thought and observation, the very things we just spent all this time upgrading, are so good, why are they eventually considered thieves of deep samadhi? Why must basic thought and observation, which absolutely help us early on in our practice, eventually be abandoned?
Think of it like a sailboat. The text compares our early, constructive thoughts to a gentle wind that helps sail the boat into the waters of samadhi. Obviously, you need that wind to get moving. But if the wind of thought and observation continues to blow too hard once you're out in deep water, it's going to agitate the surface and ultimately capsize your vessel. So to achieve the most profound stillness, eventually, even those good thoughts have to be completely dropped.
Which brings us to our final stage, Section 4, the 3 roots realizing truth.
That profound stillness we just talked about paves the way for our final culmination, which is a chronological progression of spiritual realization. Let's walk through these 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is unknown to knowing. That's your initial spark of faith and the desire for truth. Step 2 is knowing, where you're actively in the trenches, doing the work and practicing the truth. And finally, step 3 is having known, which represents ultimate completion and total mastery over your reality.
To explain this progression from ignorance to mastery, the author uses this beautiful analogy, comparing our spiritual journey to a developing embryo. The text notes that, just like a fetus in the womb, initially unaware, we start our spiritual lives blind and unformed. But as we practice, we literally grow our spiritual organs, our faith, our effort, our mindfulness. And once those mature, the spiritual entity is finally born and can truly comprehend the universe.
At this final stage, the 3rd root of having known, perfect wisdom is fully formed. There is no more striving, no more practicing, and absolutely no more wind trying to move the boat. All illusions are completely severed, and the mind is entirely, irrevocably liberated from the whole cycle of suffering.
This ancient text leaves us with a highly structured map, for sure, but it also leaves us with a profound personal challenge. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want you to ask yourself honestly, if your mind is a river, what ocean is it flowing into right now? Are your daily perceptions and knowledges just feeding an endless cycle of anxiety and attachment? Or are you doing the work to ensure they flow smoothly toward the ultimate ocean of reality? Something to think about.